Could the future of an entire continent be unfolding right now in a place most of the world hardly notices? It might sound like a stretch, maybe even impossible, but while the West spirals deeper into political dysfunction, economic instability, and cultural disillusionment, something powerful is stirring in West Africa. It's happening in a country most international media forget even exists, Burkina Faso. In this landlocked nation, long dismissed by the global elite, an idea is rising, a vision so audacious it might just reshape the destiny of Africa itself. Across Europe and the United States, the cracks are showing. From the chaos of Brexit to the fraying threads of American democracy, the West is no longer the monolith it once was. But in Africa, particularly in Burkina Faso, a new sense of purpose is emerging. It's not just political, it's psychological. A continent that has for centuries carried the weight of colonial theft, imperial manipulation, and economic dependency is now looking inward and forward. At the heart of this awakening is a city, not just any city, a city born not from foreign investors or NGO handouts, but from something far more powerful: belief. Renaissance City, a name that speaks for itself, and behind it stands a man who doesn't care to play by Western rules, President Ibrahim Traoré. He's not a talker, he's a builder. He isn't hosting summits, he's pouring concrete. While others are asking for permission, he's laying down foundations, literally and symbolically. If you're passionate about African sovereignty, Black leadership, and rewriting global narratives, like, subscribe, and share this story, because what's happening here could change everything. 1. Historical weight. To understand the significance of Renaissance City, we first need to understand what it's pushing back against. For over a century, Africa has been the world's extraction zone. Colonizers came for the gold, the oil, and the labor, human and mineral. They drew borders with rulers and pens in Berlin conference rooms, dividing up civilizations as if they were land parcels in a board game. Burkina Faso was no exception. Formerly known as Upper Volta under French rule, it was drained of resources and denied infrastructure. After independence, the story didn't change. Instead of overt control, neo-colonialism took the stage, disguised as aid, masked by institutions like the World Bank and IMF. What looked like help was often a leash. Western nations, through economic dependency and unfair trade systems, kept their grip tight. The deals were always lopsided. The beneficiaries were never African. Remember when President George W. Bush described African countries as dysfunctional? Or when Donald Trump infamously referred to them with vulgarity? These weren't slips of the tongue. They were windows into how much of the West still views Africa, not as a partner, but as a burden. That's the weight Burkina Faso is fighting against. 2. Changing global landscape. But while the old empires rot from within, new winds are blowing. Europe, once a beacon of stability, now faces internal division. Economic decline, aging populations, and immigration crises have exposed deep vulnerabilities. The UK's departure from the European Union didn't bring strength, it revealed chaos. In the US, trust in institutions is crumbling. Polarization has become the new national religion. Rising debt, decaying infrastructure, and social unrest all point to a declining empire. Meanwhile, across the global south, and particularly in Africa, a new tone is emerging. It's bold, unapologetic, and determined. African youth, the majority population on the continent, are no longer buying into the narrative that prosperity must come with Western permission. Countries are seeking partners, not masters. Sovereignty is no longer an abstract ideal, it's a demand. This is the backdrop for Burkina Faso's bold step forward. 3. Burkina Faso steps forward. Enter President Ibrahim Traoré. At just 34 years old, he represents a break from the old guard, both in style and substance. His rise wasn't about long-winded promises or political showmanship. It was about courage, about challenging French military presence, expelling exploitative mining companies, and rejecting the quiet colonization of foreign assistance. But Traoré's boldest move yet? The blueprint for Renaissance City. More than an architectural project, it's a psychological declaration. Imagine a city built from scratch not to mimic Paris or Dubai, but to express African identity, pride, and self-sufficiency. This isn't about fancy skylines. It's about building a future where decisions are made in Ouagadougou, not in Washington, Paris, or Brussels. And here's the catch. There will be no IMF loans, no World Bank strings, no nods of approval from former colonizers. The money will come from within Africa. The labor, local, the materials, African-sourced, the vision, entirely independent. 4. Symbol over structure. Renaissance City isn't just a place, it's a metaphor. In fact, you could bulldoze every building tomorrow, and the idea would still stand tall. Because what matters most isn't the infrastructure, it's the rupture. The rupture from a system that for centuries insisted Africa couldn't do anything for itself. When President Traoré says, "We're not begging, we're building," it's more than rhetoric. It's a shift in posture. It's a continent standing up straight after generations of being told to bow. Renaissance City represents something far larger than urban development. It's a symbolic dagger pointed straight at the heart of colonial mythology. It challenges every narrative that claims Africa must wait for rescue, that the West knows best, that success must look like someone else's version of modernity. And already, the ripple effects are spreading. Youth across the continent are watching closely. Leaders in neighboring nations are taking notes. And Western powers, they're getting nervous. Because what if Renaissance City works? What if it sparks a new template? One where Africa doesn't need permission. One where sovereignty isn't negotiated, it's lived. As the foundations are laid in Burkina Faso, so too is a deeper foundation for something much greater, a reimagined future for the entire African continent. Let us know in the comments, do you believe Africa is entering a new chapter of true independence? And if so, what role should visionary projects like Renaissance City play? Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're just getting started. The new city that shook the system. When the ground begins to shift beneath a crumbling empire, the tremors don't come from within. It's the lands they thought they conquered that start the quake. And right now, Burkina Faso is shaking the very foundations of the Western playbook. For centuries, the balance of global power was built on a lie that Africa was weak, that it needed guidance, help, loans, and lectures. The West didn't rise by accident. It rose on the back of Africa's enforced poverty. Its gold filled European treasuries. Its people, torn from their homes, built economies they would never benefit from. And when the chains of colonization were finally removed, they were replaced with contracts, conditions, and complicated traps disguised as assistance. But what if Africa stopped asking? What if a small, landlocked nation, one long ignored by the world's power centers, stood up and said, "Enough"? In the scorching plains of Burkina Faso, that question isn't theoretical anymore. It's being answered in bricks and mortar, in 50,000 homes, not promised but planned, not dreamed but designed, and not paid for with foreign aid or European charity, but financed with African hands, built with African sweat, and fueled by African ambition. No loans, no conditions, no dependency. That's not a slogan, that's a revolution. The crumbling Western playbook. The Western model of development has always worn a double face. To the public, it speaks of helping hands, generous aid packages, and humanitarian missions. But behind closed doors, it speaks in numbers, interest rates, profit margins, extraction rights. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are paraded as lifelines. In reality, they've often been handcuffs, strangling progress under mountains of debt, forcing countries to privatize essential services, cut public spending, and sell off natural resources just to qualify for another loan. Burkina Faso is rewriting that script. President Ibrahim Traoré has rejected the entire model. He doesn't want a seat at their table. He's building a new one without invisible chains and economic blackmail, one that doesn't serve global investors, but serves the people who walk the dusty streets, raise their children under tin roofs, and live with the daily impact of decisions made in foreign boardrooms. His refusal isn't ideological, it's practical. He's watched how the development model has hollowed out countries rich in resources but poor in control. He's not interested in being the next data point in someone else's research paper on emerging markets. Renaissance City doesn't emerge from theory. It emerges from experience, Africa's rebuttal. The soul of this city is defiance, not against progress, but against permission. Every brick laid with local labor is a statement. Every wall built from Burkina Faso soil is a challenge to dependency. The materials are African. The minds behind the architecture, the strategy, the infrastructure, African. It's more than urbanization. It's sovereignty, molded into form. Every inch of the city screams, "This is ours, built by us, for us." And in that statement lies the true confrontation. Because once one African nation demonstrates it can build without borrowing, can grow without groveling, what stops others? If you're still here, watching this unfold, then you already feel it. What's at stake? What this means? This is bigger than one city, bigger than Burkina Faso. It's a signal to an entire continent. So don't let this movement be silenced. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this story, because Africa's new chapter deserves to be heard. Western media's nervous silence. But have you seen it on CNN? Heard it discussed in European parliaments? Of course not. Renaissance City doesn't fit their script. The West has spent decades curating an image of Africa, poor, chaotic, dependent. That image justifies their help, their interventions, their investments. It allows Western citizens to believe they're rescuers, not beneficiaries of a centuries-old imbalance. So what happens when Africa stops fitting that image? What happens when the supposed recipient of help begins to outpace the so-called helpers? Western media doesn't know how to cover this story, so it doesn't. They'll spotlight Burkina Faso when there's violence. They'll write headlines if Traoré stumbles. But they stay silent when the most radical political and architectural experiment on the continent is unfolding in real time. Because Renaissance City proves something dangerous. Africa never needed saving. It needed space, space to think, to build, to dream on its own terms. And now that it has it, the world doesn't know what to do. The movement is bigger than a map, but this isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. Across the continent, young leaders are watching. Planners, architects, civil engineers, teachers, they're asking different questions now. What if we didn't wait for grants? What if we didn't apply for approval? What if we built what we needed with what we had? Renaissance City is not an endpoint, it's a beginning. In Senegal, similar conversations are gaining traction. In Mali, where military leadership is also shaking off French influence, there's a quiet study of Traoré's moves. In Ghana, urban projects are beginning to echo the language of self-reliance. Even in countries still tethered to Western influence, youth movements are growing bolder, demanding the right to create without compromise. Traoré didn't just lay a blueprint for a city, he lit a fuse. A Pan-African blueprint that asks not, what will they give us, but what can we do for ourselves? It's a mindset shift, a paradigm flip, from charity to challenge, from survival to self-determination. And what terrifies the old powers most is this: it's working. Burkina Faso is proving that dignity doesn't require dollars from abroad. That innovation doesn't only live in Silicon Valley. That hope, real hope, can rise from the dust if people are given ownership over their futures. The West may have written the early chapters of Africa's modern history, but they don't own the rest of the book, because now Africa is writing with its own pen, and Renaissance City is the ink. There's a quiet power in watching something new rise where nothing stood before. Where once was only scrubland and dust, there are now roads forming, foundations being poured, not just into the ground, but into a vision. Renaissance City is no longer an idea. It's not a plan or a speech or a blueprint. It's real, and it's growing. But beyond the brick, beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, what's really being constructed is something the world has not seen in over a century. A sovereign African future, unapologetically led by Africans, free from colonial permission slips. This is not just about buildings, it's about becoming. And as it rises, so too does the question, what happens when a people reclaims the power to define their own tomorrow? The man behind the movement. At the heart of this unfolding transformation is one of the most polarizing yet magnetic figures in modern African politics, President Ibrahim Traoré. Young, sharp, and completely unbothered by Western convention, Traoré doesn't behave like the leaders who came before him. He doesn't bow to diplomats. He doesn't host expensive summits where nothing changes. He doesn't speak for applause. He speaks for action. Traoré rose from the ranks of the military, not through politics, but through a reckoning. Burkina Faso, like much of West Africa, had grown tired of puppet leaders, tired of smiling photo ops with European officials while children died from hunger or walked miles for water. The system had failed, so the people turned to someone who wasn't afraid to challenge it. And challenge it he did. Traoré's rise was a signal. Burkina Faso would no longer play the role assigned to it in the global theatre. And Renaissance City, that's his manifesto in physical form. He doesn't need to write books or give TED Talks. He just points to the cranes, to the workers, to the homes emerging from red soil, and says, "This is what we believe." A model for the continent. But the deeper truth is this: Renaissance City was never just for Burkina Faso. This was never just about housing or infrastructure. This was about offering an alternative model, about showing the continent that the path forward doesn't have to be paved by World Bank advisors or depend on trickle-down donations from European capitals. And other nations are starting to notice. In Guinea, discussions about localized financing have grown louder. In Niger and Mali, which have similarly rejected French military presence, there's a growing appetite for self-funded development. In Tanzania, community-led housing cooperatives are quietly learning from the Renaissance model, prioritizing local labor, materials, and leadership. Across Africa, the ripple effects are undeniable. Not because Renaissance City is the biggest or richest project, but because it dares to be different. It's a living, breathing rejection of dependency, a visible demonstration that an African-led future isn't just possible, it's already happening. Shifting global power. And while Africa begins to look inward for strength, the global order is beginning to feel the tremble. The same Western powers that once dictated development policy are now scrambling to understand this new current. Their influence, long taken for granted, is suddenly being questioned. Their contracts challenged, their relevance fading. For centuries, their power rested on one assumption: that Africa needed them more than they needed Africa. That assumption is dying, and the global stage is shifting with it. China, already an aggressive economic player on the continent, is recalibrating its approach, no longer the only alternative to the West. Russia is increasing diplomatic ties with Francophone nations. Regional trade blocs like ECOWAS, though historically weak, are being reimagined under pressure from this rising tide of self-determination. Africa is no longer a chessboard, it's becoming a player. And it's doing so not with weapons or speeches, but with cities, with schools, with solar grids and railways and farms that feed their own people first. Renaissance City isn't just a project, it's proof. A new cultural narrative. But perhaps the most radical part of this transformation isn't economic, it's psychological. For generations, Africans were told, directly and subtly, that development was something that came to them, not from them. That excellence, innovation, and modernity were foreign imports. That's changing. In Renaissance City, children will grow up in homes their parents built. They will walk to schools designed by Burkinabe architects. They will live under energy systems powered by local sun, not foreign grids. They will grow up believing the future belongs to them. And that belief, that fundamental shift in self-image, is more powerful than any loan package or foreign investment, because when a people begin to expect dignity, when they no longer ask for it but demand it, the entire structure of exploitation begins to collapse. That's what Traoré is really building, not just a city, but a citizen. Facing the consequences. Of course, none of this comes without cost. The West doesn't surrender influence quietly. Burkina Faso's shift has already drawn criticism, sanctions, and cold shoulders from the very institutions it once depended on. Western diplomats are nervous. Media outlets are cautious. There is pressure, subtle and overt, for the country to return to democratic norms, as if democracy must always wear a European suit and speak a Western language. But Traoré is not naive. He knows the stakes, he knows the playbook, and so do the people. They've tasted the possibility of self-determination, and they're not giving it up. Even if Renaissance City stalls, even if external forces try to sabotage its progress, even if it becomes more symbol than structure, it will have already succeeded in the most important way. It made Africans dream on their own terms again. What happens next will define not just Burkina Faso, but the trajectory of African independence in the 21st century. Will the experiment survive economic retaliation? Will internal stability match external ambition? Will the model hold when tested by climate, corruption, and regional politics? No one knows for certain. But what we do know is this: the world cannot unsee what has begun. Young Africans are watching. They're studying urban planning not to work in Dubai, but to build in Dakar. They're learning coding not to join Silicon Valley, but to transform Nairobi. They're becoming journalists not to mimic the BBC, but to rewrite Africa's own stories. And when they look for proof that it can be done, they will look to Burkina Faso, to the dusty plains where a city once rose from the soil, where leaders dared to lead, not follow, and where a nation declared with quiet defiance, "We are not what the world thinks we are. We are more. We are builders. We are the future." If this story moved you, if you see in Renaissance City not just buildings, but hope, then help this vision reach further. Like this video, share it. Subscribe for more stories the world won't tell you, because Africa's Renaissance has already begun, and it's time the world caught up.